Reform's conference had been about staging, smoke, the football shirts, the set-piece lines, yet the front pages tomorrow will belong to Angela Rayner's resignation and Keir Starmer's rapid reshuffle. In politics you can engineer spectacle, but you can't outbid genuine drama. And first the facts that framed the evening. Angela Rayner's quit as Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary over unpaid stamp duty, and within hours, at astonishing speed, Starmer has moved David Lammy to Deputy Prime Minister and Justice, shifted Yvette Cooper to the Foreign Office and installed Shabana Mahmood at the Home Office. That is a full-scale reset at the sovereign end of government, not a mid-table tweak. It vacuumed up every newsroom and most of the oxygen in Birmingham. And now, to Birmingham, because it would be silly to ignore it, Nigel Farage tried to seize the tempo by dragging his speech forward and by inflating the stakes. He declared that reform is preparing for government, hinted at a 2027 election, promised to stop small boats within 2 weeks. That's a little bit like Trump promising to stop the Ukraine war in 24 hours, trailed mass deportation, scrapping net zero, a ministry of all talents, and a new department for preparing for government with Zia Youssef as head of policy. The crowd roared, the cameras rolled, and then London rolled right over him. Farage's message relied on two conditions. Incumbents must be visibly failing, and reform must look increasingly plausible. Today satisfied the first condition and damaged the second. The Prime Minister, who can remove a deputy and rewire the top 3 offices of state in one afternoon, projects control, not despair. And whether the policy substance holds is another matter, but the immediate signal is grip. And Farage's framing of a government in meltdown is harder to sustain when the government looks decisively busy. Stop the boats in 2 weeks, it's a brilliantly sticky line and an administrative impossibility without suspending a lattice of UK statutes and international commitments, plus building detainment capacity that simply doesn't exist. The claim invites its own debunking cycle. Even sympathetic voters will ask, how precisely in week 1 and week 2? The risk is repetition turns potency into parody. Reuters' straight write-up helps him tonight. Tomorrow's forensic pieces will not. And they will be brutal, believe me. Reform has executed a show, pyrotechnics, a swelling crowd, the mood music of insurgency, yet nothing competes with a Downing Street resignation followed by an instant elevation of a new Foreign Secretary and a Deputy Prime Minister. Newsrooms always privilege authority in motion, and that is why the football strip will be a picture caption, not a splash. Farage showcased Nadine Dorries and re-elevated Zia Youssef. That helps fill a credibility gap, but it also reopens an old Tory psychodrama and invites questions about governing depth, funding and policy costings. Labour's counterattack, anger without answers, will land with editors who watched a reshuffle produce actual names and offices while reform produced ambition and mood. Speculation about Jacob Rees-Mogg hovers because he and other Conservatives have been on reform-adjacent stages. It feeds the theatre, not the strategy. Even if he migrated, it would reinforce a Tory diaspora story more than it would validate a governing prospectus. And as of tonight, reporting points to appearances on the reform fringe by Jacob Rees-Mogg, not crossing of the floor. It titillates, it doesn't transform. He's teasing, is Jacob Rees-Mogg. Farage's 2027 hint is clever. It keeps activists on a campaign footing and paints Labour as brittle after a year. But once you move from protest to prospectus, you inherit arithmetic. Stopping boats, rebuilding industry, scrapping net zero, rewriting judicial constraints, reindustrialising on cheap energy all require timetables, draft bills, budgets and a civil service plan. And the more he looks like a Prime Minister in waiting, the more editors will do the line-by-line analysis. Tomorrow's promise buys him a week of scrutiny he has to survive. And reform's rise thrives on grievance and media attention. Downing Street cries usually help that cause. The crisis in Downing Street is usually beneficial to reform, but when the crisis ends, With a swift retooling, the narrative flips from chaos to capacity. And the paradox is simple. The more professional Starmer appears in a crunch, the more persuasive is the claim that Farage hasn't got it. The more Starmer has the wind in his sails, the more it appears that Farage has flatulence in his pants. The more Starmer appears professional, the less persuasive the claim that only reform offers order. Headline gravity goes to Rayner's resignation and the Cooper Lamy Mahmood reshuffle. That is where the front pages land, not on Farage and Birmingham. Reform had a successful rally inside the hall and a weaker day outside it. The competing story was simply bigger than anything Farage could project. The boats in 2 weeks' line will play now and bite him later. Its half-life will be measured by fact checks and follow-up interviews, and he won't survive that. Does Starmer accompany the reshuffle with operational moves at the Home Office that blunt reform's wedge on borders? Do any further Tory figures actually jump, or do they merely speak at fringes and flirt with the cameras? Does reform release costed drafts or keep to rally rhetoric? If costings are thin, the tax and spend questions will be brutal. That's what we have to watch tomorrow and over the next few days. Farage staged a concert. Number 10 staged an act of state. Voters and editors know the difference. Tomorrow belongs to Rayner's exit and Yvette Cooper's first day as Britain's chief diplomat, not to a turquoise jersey in Birmingham that tells us that Farage doesn't really know how to play football, and it's all for show. It's all for show. Cheap knockoff T-shirts are supposed to attract attention. Well, they don't when the real Prime Minister is doing something functional in number 10.